Dr. Carl and Dr. Berwyn. Welcome to the Graduate Dentist Podcast.
Well, thanks for having us. Keep for a good yap session.
Thanks for having us, Erica.
Yeah, it's going to be a very good yap session. But oftentimes, the best conversations that I have with my guests are when it's like a dynamic duo and they're together. Well, Carl and Berwyn, for those that don't know you, I had said, look, you can't have one without the other. And so I wanted to know, how did you guys meet and what started the friendship and this partnership?
We would have told this story, I think, at least 100 times, but it's good that
So
it's now
is it
recorded.
consistent?
Yeah, so it's consistent. So now,
Very good at telling
so
it.
now I think we can just say, refer to Erica's podcast if you want to know the story. But me and Carl actually met at Australian Dental Student ADSA Association convention. They still run that? Sorry, I must be a dinosaur now. I don't even know. They still do that every year?
Yeah, they do.
It was the Gold Coast convention.
Yeah.
Carl was actually studying at Griffith, so he was a local student there. I was studying in Charleston, and then we all sort of ADSA, for those that don't know, it's a week where all the dental students come in. There's
Party.
parties part of it. Most people go for that. Some lectures and program for five days. So it's a great networking sort of thing for dental students. I went to obviously for network and to meet other people as well in a similar field. And that's when I met Carl through ADSA. Or Carl thought he was a pretty cool guy. We'll introduce ourselves.
Won't go into too much detail.
Yeah, won't go into too much details from there.
Was there any pickup lines there?
Yeah. Some bit of bromance. And then we sort of knew of each other. Carl had a really close group of boys as well as, that I knew as well through mutuals, because we're all from Sydney. And then we sort of just knew of each other. And then we finished our sort of dentistry journey from there. Once I became a dentist, we actually worked in different locations and places. I didn't connect with Carl that closely, maybe just, by social media, see what he's doing and whatnot, until maybe about 3 to 4 years in, where Carl will tell that story a bit later, where he's actually jumped through a few different jobs. And myself, I jumped through a few different jobs as well. And then we all, both me and Carl landed in one clinic. That was a dental clinic in Eastwood. It's in one of the smaller shopping centers on the Korean side. Yeah. And it just happens that both me and Carl actually shared a day where we worked together. It was a Friday. It was a very, very memorable Friday because I always saw Carl. We always chatted about our week. And Carl will share a little bit about his sort of journey through his first 4 years as well. Once we sort of met on that Friday, we sort of connected with each other more. And more, we wanted to explore options for ownership, seeing that, we want to build something of our own. Spoke to each other about our goals, what we want to achieve, what we want to do in the next 5-10 years, and what sort of areas of dentistry we both want to go into as well. And that's sort of a line that we thought, we could potentially do a partnership. So from there, we actually signed up to a course to learn more about practice ownership.
That was No's course.
That was No's course, that's right, yeah. And to cut it simple, one very important thing both me and Carl got out of that course was when No just basically touched a little bit on benefits as well as problems or potential issues with partnership. But obviously, we just thought about, what are the benefits of being partnership? And both Carl and I care about lifestyle. And one of the things is like, if you have a partner, one can go on holidays, the other one can look after the clinic, and then vice versa, the other one can go on holidays, the other one can look after the clinics. And we're like, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. We can go on our holidays that we want to. And then from there on, we always thought, we'll make good partners. Carl really wants to get into ortho. My area was surgery, it didn't conflict with each other. And that was really good. So from there, we started looking at clinics and the rest is history, I guess. Yeah.
I love that there was so much to unpack from you guys sharing all of that. I wanted to unpack certain points that you guys had shared, but you said that you'd kind of crossed paths in the past and then ended up at the same clinic. Did you guys know that the other person was working at the clinic? Or was that an influence for you guys working at that same clinic? Or just purely coincidental? It was like, oh, hey, you work here too.
It was purely coincidental.
Yeah.
And it was pretty random as well.
That's right, yeah. And if we're going to go into details, that job, it wasn't the easiest job. So when I say that, nothing against clinics, but, when we graduated, it was everyone knows Eastwood, big Asian population. And the patients there tend to prefer, no gap treatment. They want you to swipe their cards and things like that.
Difficult job.
Yeah, it was a hard job.
Communication-wise.
Yeah, it was quite hard to communicate to some of these patients as well because they're the specific type of patients. So because of that, Carl actually applied for that job, which I was in. I think he lasted about a week.
1 weekend.
And then he said, "No, this is not it."
Yeah.
And then he moved on to something more.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, before Carl, we also know the other dentists that
Dentists
went
joined
there
that,
and joined that same position, and he lasted 2 days.
Yeah.
So it was him,
Wow.
Carl, and then myself, and
And Berwyn had the grit to persevere through this
I
job.
persevered for a few years. But if I didn't persevere, I wouldn't have met Carl.
Well, you wouldn't have
I
met
mean, I
Carl.
wouldn't have known Carl more, and we wouldn't have sort of met in a working environment. So, everything happens for a reason. So I'm grateful for that. But
Oh,
it
I
was a
love
tough
that.
job. Yeah, it was a tough job. It was days where you're just like, I studied 5 years for this.
Yeah.
A lot of dentistry wasn't what you sort of would expect when you graduated. But I think, that's what I tell a lot of new graduates as well. I think one of the things is you need to stick to the same location and just push through. The grass is always greener. You can always look at other people and say, oh, it's great somewhere there. But what you don't realize is someone has done the hard work. They've built a patient basis. They built that trust and their relationship with the patient basis for them to get to where they are, right? So I thought, I'm just going to stick to it
Yeah.
and then run through it. And I think me and Carl always look back on this and would say, we sort of changed that or turned that clinic around because the patients started to trust us more. They sort of understood the value of dentistry that we provide, the value of the treatment. Carl did a lot of orthodontic treatment there, and I think he really developed his ortho career from there as well, seeing all these patients. And myself as well, I developed a lot of communication skills, how to deal with some difficult patients. So I was very, very grateful and very thankful for that.
I remember this one story, which I always tell grads. It's like, I remember this one time when Berwyn saw this patient and proposed, I think, a treatment. I think it was root canal or something. And then the patient asked Berwyn to leave the room because the patient wanted to call her Chinese dentist overseas to make sure Berwyn was proposing the right thing. Yeah.
Can you
And then
cross-check it?
then Berwyn actually left the room. I was like, did you actually leave the room? But, that was the kind of patience we saw. And I think that we develop a lot of like good communication skills, how to deal with like big objections, the most ridiculous objections without but still sounding professional. And I think some hard jobs you can learn a lot from them by staying there, because if you make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah.
We always say that to ourselves, and we're it's definitely true.
Yeah.
I really want to dive into that, particularly where you guys talk about like those hardships and those challenges in the early years. And I know you yourself, Carl, have your own story to share about going between multiple practices before finding your own feed, and this concept of sticking with it. And through those hardships is where if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And that's a really important, I guess, philosophy and mindset that I really hope that we can share with our graduate dentist audience, because I think when you're young, you don't have relativity on your side. And so the grass always seems greener. And you're like, Carl, sorry, you don't have relativity, but you haven't seen it, and you're like, why don't I get those results instantly? We're kind of conditioned for that, like instant feedback, that instant gratification of just like, I've graduated 5 years, shouldn't I be seeing the results? Why aren't patients saying yes? But I guess from like your positions where you've now got the benefit of hindsight, of looking back and saying like, well, it's because I stayed there and because we developed those relationships before, because we toughed it out, that we were then able to get the results that we got. I kind of want, I guess there's so much to unpack about your story, and I think that was beautiful, Berwyn, because you've kind of given us a little synopsis of the journey of Carl and Berwyn, from how you guys met, the early years, to going to the Nerves Dental Practice Ownership course and learning about that, deciding whether partnership was it or not. And then obviously there's still the other side of the journey of actually practice ownership, of partnership, of developing now multiple practices. You guys have like 6 practices between the two of you. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
And so let's wind it back to that beginning when you guys had mentioned your early years. And one of the sentiments that I got when you shared your story that I thought was so sweet, and why I really wanted to start it off with, okay, tell us the dynamic duo story, is because, previously on the podcast, we've had like Carlos and Sean, we've had Bharat and Johan, these people that were just like, and they always share how they met. It was oftentimes like through a community or through Instagram, or like yourselves meeting at ADSA and this convention, right? And you never, I guess it's one thing that I wanted to share with the audience is you never know, right? Like where you're going to meet people. You never know where you're going to meet your next best friend, someone who you end up working together with or you go into partnership with. And I think that's just like, I guess, a beautiful sentiment of putting yourself out there, going to these events and having that open mind and never knowing like what you could connect, where you could end up, right? Do you guys ever think about that, of like, oh, the serendipity of having met at that one convention and it bringing you guys to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. I think it's also a really small world as well. You just don't know when. Yeah, it's just it's pretty crazy. I don't really think about it too much, but having looked back,
Yeah, like, I mean, people may say things happen for a reason.
yeah,
But I think you do have to put yourself out there. Dentistry can be a very isolating job, especially if you work in a small private clinic. You see the same people over and over. So we always encourage a lot of our dentists, join a community, join an association, expand your circles. Yeah, like you said, you never know who you meet. I didn't go into that thinking I'll find a business partner. I just wanted to, have fun,
Party.
have a few drinks with friends, do a bit of
Yeah.
partying. You just never know the sort of people that you'll meet through these things. So, I think definitely, and looking back on it, yeah, maybe it's luck, maybe it's fate.
yeah. But here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
But yeah, definitely luck plays a huge part, I think, in a lot of things.
And it was like how you guys said, like, maybe it started off as just like, oh, an acquaintance or someone that you met once, but then later you just, through luck, ended up in the same position. And through that hardship of working at that practice, it kind of forged what was needed for you guys to see, like, oh, how your skills align, how you could actually make something work. Carl, can I get you to share a bit about, like, we've teased a bit about it, of your early years prior, I guess, to landing into this position and working here, kind of going into a role that seemed really challenging. And I think a lot of grads can relate to that, where the first job isn't what they were hoping for. It isn't as glamorous. And obviously working somewhere like Metro Sydney, where patients can be really demanding, or you're working with a difficult demographic. What was your first early years with trying to land a job and navigating the practice and the patients you were seeing?
I think, man, the first year was, I think, definitely probably one of the most difficult years of my life, in the sense that I didn't have, and it's not like I had went through extreme hardship, don't get me wrong, but I think as soon as I graduated, I think after 6 months, I was like, why did I do dentistry? This is so fucking hard, right?
Yeah.
I was like, and the thing with dentistry is you can't really go anywhere else. You've got to be a dentist, right? I mean, sure, you can be an educator, go into academia, things like that. But the reason why I felt the way I did was because I think number one was probably my fault. I was a bit too impatient. And also, I had too high expectations of what it was going to be like, as well as being dentist. So I thought, finish 5 years, oh my God, I made it through, didn't fail a year. Now I'm going to get to be a dentist, make lots of money, and just have a really good life. But it was definitely not like that. I think so the first job, I stayed there for about 6 months, and the issue with that job was, well, partly it was my fault as well. I didn't have any communication skills. I didn't have any good clinical skills to any complex treatment as well. But yeah, I just saw 2 or 3 patients a day, maybe built it up to maybe 4 or 5 patients a day. That went on for months and months. And I should have talked to other peers, but I thought that was normal. And I think it is quite normal. To be honest, it is quite normal back then, back 10 years ago. That was 2017. It was quite quiet during that year. But I wasn't really learning anything. When I did have free time, I would go observe implants with my principal dentist. I mean, but then it was cool to see, but you're not going to be doing implants first year out. Maybe as these days do speak that actually. So I stuck with that job, and I just kind of gave up in the end. I did actually get fired as well.
From that job?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the reason for that, if you don't mind sharing?
I think it was just mainly because I didn't have the clinical skills, and I didn't have the communication skills to build and I completely recognized that as well. So after that, I went on a CBT binge. I spent all my money I did 3 CBDs on communication. I did so many CBDs after that, just to try and level myself up. But yeah, that was my first job. And then after that, I skipped through quite a few part-time jobs to make up a full-time job. And the issues were just quiet books, no mentorship. 10 years ago, I don't think mentorship was really
It wasn't
brought
a
up.
thing, right?
Not
Was in
Yeah.
a big thing, yeah.
Yeah, no mentorship. So I went through a lot of jobs, and eventually I kind of almost gave up. I was like, screw it. I'm just going to finish this year, and I'm going to go on a 6-month holiday. And I was like, I deserve it. Never took this gap year that everyone keeps talking about. I'm going to go travel the world. But then what the one of the Hong, from Expertise reached out, was like, "Hey, do you want to do a locum at least for about 2-3 months?" And I was like, it was November. I was like, okay, let's give it a go. So I actually went to rural for about around December of my first year. And then when I got there, I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like the patients are so nice. This is such a good experience. I was learning so much. And from then on, I actually stayed there for 3 years. And I think that's how I ended up loving regional practice. And we're still there to this point. And that changed everything for me.
So you never went on that 6-month, self-discovery
Never,
journey?
I still haven't gone. I still haven't
I'm
gone.
still
I
waiting.
still don't
Or
know
maybe
myself. I still don't know.
You deserve it. You plan on it.
you deserve it. It's been 10 years, Carl. I think you deserve it now.
Yeah.
It's too late. It's too late.
We've all felt that frustration where you've spent a whole appointment explaining dentistry. You answer every question, you know exactly what your patient needs, only for them to say, yeah, I'll think about it. And you're left wondering, why don't they get it? And for a long time, I thought the answer was becoming a better dentist. Maybe if I do more courses, learn more dentistry, gain more experience, then they'll trust me and finally say yes. But after 5 years of podcasting, speaking with hundreds of dentists, and reflecting on my own journey, I've come to realize we don't get to do the dentistry we want to by learning more dentistry. We get to do it by helping our patients understand why it matters to them and overcoming all of our subconscious habits that are quietly undermining us. You see, good communication doesn't lie in scripts or sales tactics. It's about creating connection, building trust, and empowering others. And this is everything that I have poured into with Open Up, a communication course for the contemporary dentist, where I teach you all the mindset shifts that have helped me better communicate with confidence and the practical frameworks I use every day to provide structure and clarity to my consults. Because nothing's worse than knowing exactly what your patient needs, only to fumble over your words and confuse both yourself and the patient. And so if you'd like to learn more, I'd love to have you join us at our final Open Up workshop of the year in Melbourne on the 22nd and 23rd of August. Early bird registrations close this week, so don't miss out. You can find all the details in our show notes. Because communication isn't just the soft skill, it's the difference between knowing the right dentistry and actually getting to do it. I have a question. I was going to say, and maybe you're able to answer this now in hindsight, right? But particularly early on when you were saying you were skipping through a few jobs, you got fired from your very first job, you're like, books are quiet, you didn't have the communication skills, you didn't have the clinical skills. I think that's a sentiment that a lot of grads can relate to. But what's difficult is it the practice or is it me? And I kind of wondered if we unpacked it a little bit. Do you feel like it was the practice was it just the practice that was quiet? Was it like all the dentists were quiet? Was it just the state of like the economy or things? You said 2017 was a hard year. Like, was it that, or was it you and how your attitude or mindset? And I guess now being on the other side where you also look after and like mentor and have a lot of young grads working for you, how do you make that distinction of, is it the practice that's not fitting you, or is there inner work that we need to do ourselves?
These days, I like to take the approach that I take full ownership of everything that happens to me. So I think I definitely lacked communication skills. I didn't have the patience either. There were actually, in hindsight, some jobs I think was actually pretty good in the sense that I had the principal that actually cared about my growth, wanted me to win. I think in hindsight, it was still me at the end of the day. I was too impatient, didn't have the skills, I didn't stick it through. But there are some red flags that I think some grads should look out for in a job. For example, there's one job where if I did, treatment plan like a complex work in the sense that I had a crown for once, the principal, if they were quiet, they would move that treatment back to them. I think that's a red flag. I think if you don't get any new patients given to you at all, I think that's another red flag because, if you're starting as a new dentist, I think you should have some new patients to try and, build up your books. And I think another thing would be, I think first year I should have a mentor or principal dentist that actually wants to, check in on you. I want you to grow as well. I think those are some important things. Yeah, so I think all in all, I think still I should have, I should have stuck to it. I just should have stayed in some of the jobs that I did go through.
To
Yeah.
add to that, I don't think, from my point of view, I don't think there's any definite answer to say it's the practice fault or the practitioner or the clinician's fault, because I think there are what we see sometimes is some newer grads, they they want full boots from day one. They expect all these things, and when things don't go well or their boots start to get quiet, then they sort of put the blame on the practice. I don't think that's necessarily right. Um, what Carl said, I completely agree. You should take ownership of yourself as a clinician and what you do, and why that patient did not book in. Why did that patient, um, either want to think about it or call back for the treatment? What can I do better in my consult or my communication to get this patient? These are the things we say a lot to our graduates. But at the same time, you still need some patience to make it work.
Yeah.
If you just go into a practice and you have, like Carl said, there's a few red flags you spot. The principal are very controlling of the books. There are just no new patients coming in. Your books are very, very empty from the get-go. Then it's very hard for you to build as well. You need to be in a comfortable environment and an environment where there are some sort of flow of patients and some growth. But end of the day, I think you should look at yourself as well
Yeah.
and take ownership, to say, what can I do to grow my books, to be the clinician I want to do, to grow myself as a dentist. So I think on both sides, right? But I do think, if you look at these days, there is a gradual shift towards new dentists or new graduate dentists sort of just not taking ownership and just blaming everything on the practice or the boards or how the patients are, or say, oh, I don't have patients that can afford crowns, which is why I'm not doing it. I don't necessarily think that's completely true. Yeah.
Unless I think expectations were set from the get-go, be like, hey, this is a new practice, we'll build you up over time, but I'm gonna really take ownership and trying to teach you as much as possible and help you grow. I think what was said or discussed at the job interview, or when the job was offered, is very important as well. I think if there's a huge mismatch, then that's a bit unfortunate.
It reminds me, and I think of this analogy, and I think it's Jesse Green that talks about like patient retention and like describing it like a bathtub with a faucet. But it's like, having a full bathtub and like the two perspectives of like, as a dentist, like you're in control of receiving that water, which is like your patients. But then if you've not plugged it and it's just constantly leaking out because patients are leaving or they're not booking back in or they're saying no or I'll think about it, then one mentality is thinking, oh, I just need to turn the water on, which is needing more patience or expecting the practice to provide you with more water to fill your bathtub. But if it's constantly leaking out, then it's, where's the problem then? It's that it's leaking out. Can you do something to plug that hole? But then there's that balance as well, because it's like, well, if you're not getting anything, if they're not giving you any water at all, if the taps are closed entirely, well, then you're not going to go anywhere. So I agree with you, Berwyn, where it's like it's not just one or the other, but it's a balance between the both, and being able to assess it yourself. And yeah, being able to reflect back on it is obviously beneficial. We shared a little bit about your journey up until that point, Carl, and I do want to dive into, I guess, what you felt things changed when you went to regional and you're like, oh, this is amazing, like this is great. But Berwyn, can you bring us up to speed to, like, I guess the same point in time, how your first years were? Did you experience, I guess, a similar challenge or similar struggle, or was it different for you?
Yeah. So for me, my story is slightly different. I did go through the public route. So when I finished, I studied not in a city. So, Charleston is in Orange mainly. So I'm from Sydney originally. And, 5 years of driving to rural, coming back on weekends, I really missed being in Sydney. So one of the things, I think similar with Carl as well, was location was very, very important to me, as, a lot of new grads would say these days. But I really wanted to be home. And, when you go through uni, you see a lot of public patients, you get to know the public system quite well, at least in New South Wales, so New South Wales Health. And I think through my year, there was a bit of perception as a public job is very well supported. You get very good mentorship, get good at certain aspects of dentistry. So I was quite keen to get into a public position. So I actually applied for Westmead Hospital. I became a level 1 dental officer, so entry level dental officer there. I stayed there for 2 full years. So 2015 to 2017, and pretty much worked as a dental officer there at Westmead. Initially, it was quite good. They did promise quite a lot of the jobs. Now, back then you would get good experience in diagnosing, treating emergency patients. There are days, when we go to, for those of you that know, acute care or emergency, we see up to 16, 20 patients a day. So you get very quick at these sort of treatments. There's extraction clinics where you go in, take out 30, 40 teeth a day. That does happen as well.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So those are the good aspects that you will get better at. But I dare say, within the 2 years, I do realize you're missing out a lot of other things. Technology was a bit behind back then. There was no use of any scanners. We didn't do much fixed pros. So, crown, bridges, definitely not. Definitely not touching anything on orthodontics or implants, anything like that. You did get some rotations to specialty departments, which you could see specialists do more complex treatment, but it's quite rare that you get to do some of that. So I think from the 2 years of me being there, I got the skills that I wanted to have. And then I wanted to sort of expand my scope and, do more. So that's when I started looking for part-time jobs in private practice. So after my two full years, I did a part-time job in private practice and a part-time job still at the hospital. So I did that for another 2 years until COVID. So what I wanted to get out of that 2 years was a bit of a transition to private practice. And I'll be honest, thinking back now, I think it was actually quite difficult to get the job that I wanted to get, having public experience, because as sort of employers now, me and Carl, if we see someone that came from public, then there's nothing against that, but
Yeah.
we sort of have an image of what they will be like, what their sort of treatment philosophy will be like. And I found, if I really wanted that part-time job to, do more complex treatment, couldn't really find clinics that allow me to do that. After a few different jobs, then I was settled in the first job that I met Carl in, that we talked about then. And I did part-time hospital as well. So that was sort of my journey until obviously we met and we started looking at clinics. And then once we bought our first clinic, then I stopped doing public from there.
You were saying that, I guess now from an employer's perspective, there's like a particular perception of maybe like the treatment philosophy and how a public trained dentist may like think and perform and like do dentistry. Is that, I guess, because you yourself, like when you moved to private, like there was that transition in mentality or philosophy, or do you think you always kind of knew what you wanted to do? Like, I guess could you dive into that transition?
Yeah, 100%. Because I mean, in public dentistry, there's a constant flow and unlimited patients, right? We'll say unlimited because there's always a wait list. You're always going to get patients. You're never going to be not busy. You're always going to be seeing patients. But these patients are not paying for any of their treatments. So whenever you treatment plan, some, let's say filling or deep clean or even endodontics, no one will ever say no as long as they agree with what they want with your treatment plan. Because of that, I think I did lack a lot in communication. And I dare say the first 2 years, I probably didn't really work on my communication skills, and I didn't have the patience where, I need to explain things clearly or, try to convince the patient to do any treatment. It was just, this is the treatment plan. They'll say yes, they'll come in and do that. So that's one thing that we do see out of dentists that, has only worked in public dentistry. They never have to have those skills to convince patients to do the treatment. So that's why they usually tend to be lacking on those skills. Having said that, that's not for every single person. That's just the general sort of
Trend.
pattern that we see. And it's for a good reason, right? Because you don't need to convince this person for the treatment. So that's one. Number two, talking about money, it's not an easy thing. I think, as a new grad, it's always daunting to talk about money. And we get a lot of new grads coming to us and say, am I charging too much, too little? Like, should I put
Mm.
all these things? So I never had that problem, right? Until I went to private practice and realized, man, people are paying for these treatment. And,
Is
now
it
I have to
worth
talk
it?
about
Am I
money and
worth
costs, right? That's
it?
right, yeah. And, at the start, it can be a bit awkward, just your body language, how you communicate these things. So that I think I really had to learn, and I had to learn the hard way. One thing I always, tell Carl is he did a lot of CPD after that first experience,
Yeah.
which has, really contributed to the dentist that he is today. And me, I didn't do as much, and I wish I did more communication courses that taught me how to communicate clearly and to patients, and to convince them, to do the treatment as well. So yeah, money was a big thing, and yeah, those two are probably quite the main things. Of course, there is other treatment that sometimes we see that public dentists don't see as much. We tend to see they're a bit more conservative because they don't do many. By the way, this is not every public job, but when I was at Westmead, every crown that your treatment plan had to get approved. I believe now you can't really even do crowns anymore on patients. But then you get into the habit of not looking at a multi-filling amalgam that's cracked, and you automatically go, I'm going to do a repair, right? Instead of thinking about the treatment options, talking to the patients about what are the options, what I think is best for you. And because of that, you get into this mindset of you miss things when you treatment plan, and how someone from only a public treatment plans the case could be very, very different to someone that was in private practice, with the right mentorship or with the right support as well. So that's one thing that I saw, and I had to sort of change for myself. And because I had the public experience, I really could see the difference. Yeah, once I went to private
Mm.
practice.
I love that like we've kind of brought both your stories like up to speed to like the same point in time. And what was really interesting is as you guys both shared those individually, there was this one phrase that you both said that was consistent where you said in your early years the two things that you weren't or that you were was impatient and that you both didn't prioritize communication as much in those early years. And I guess as someone that talks a lot about communication and I guess like we talk a lot about it on the podcast about like that mentality about patience and communicating well with your patients. Looking back to who you guys were in your early years, if you could give really tangible, specific advice of what you would do differently, it's one thing, I guess, saying like, oh, I'd learn to communicate better or I'd be more patient. But what does that actually mean? And like, could you share like even just like 3 really actionable tips of like, what would you actually do differently if you could speak to like new grad Berwyn or new grad Carl in terms of being more patient and communicating better?
I think number one would be I would tell the younger self, I would tell him to do at least 2 communication courses in the first year, because I feel like is what sets you up as a good dentist. And for you to be able to communicate clearly to patients what the ideal treatment plan is, instead of being like just a emergency patch-up dentist. I think learning from different providers gives you a different perspective as well. Wouldn't recommend just learning everything from one provider. I would recommend, yeah, going to see 2 different communication courses, seeing the different perspectives that it brings. And then also I think another thing used to do, and I still now do sometimes, is I think it's good to keep track of all the patients you see, the new patients, and, see I showed our grads a little Excel I used to keep where I'll see like, Mrs. Jones, and I recommended, 2 crowns and a filling, and I just want to track those patients because not every practice will track them for you. And it's really actually really revealing how many patients say no to you. It's very humbling, and it forces you to confront reality that you're not that good at communicating. But then then forces you to get better, right? And you have to realize, your first year out, second year out, it's okay as well, but I think it's important to recognize the need to get better.
That's actually a really good exercise that I remember doing as well. Like particularly when books are quiet, is occasionally what I would do is go through like previous months of okay, well, who were the new patients I saw or patients that we proposed treatment, and then were they rebooked? And oh, okay, if they weren't rebooked, why weren't they rebooked? Or like, did they cancel? Okay, why did they cancel? And whether that's something that I should personally follow up or call the patient and kind of find out. And I think, as you said, Carl, is very revealing because it's one thing constantly focusing on like the next patient, the next one, but actually there's so much still on the table if you go back and reflect of, oh, why didn't those ones work out? And I think it's very humbling, very much
Yeah, it's
so
really
when you realize,
we've
oh, yeah, because it's easy to just like move on and not
yeah,
actually see what wasn't accepted. You were going to add
yeah.
something, Carl. Mm.
No, I think, I was just gonna add, yeah, that's like, that's, having just self-awareness of what's actually happening, right, with what you're doing. It's really important. It's also really important to just try and reflect on what happened in that conversation as well. When you talk to Mrs. Jones, like how did I say, how did I say things and what could I have done better? I think self-reflecting is a skill that I think is really important if you want to become a good dentist, is to consistently self-reflect on what happened last week, what happened the month before, why my book's getting quiet. Is it me? Is it, the sign of times? I think it's really important.
To add to that, I think one thing I will tell to younger dentists, especially if your books are quiet, treat every patient as if it's your only patient of the day, right? So, basic things, yes, if they're booked in for 45 minutes, why not spend an hour and a half going through things, discussing things? We tell all our graduates to have a camera. Photos are very, very, very important in this day and age, that you can't just say, you need some fillings, here's a printed treatment plan. Visual aids are very, very important. So we see all our good dentists are the ones that get a camera, are very proactive with the camera, take full set of photos. In our sort of graduate program, we tell all our graduates to, at the very minimum, take 3 photos, upper arch, lower arch, and a smile. And if we're doing any sort of cosmetic cases, then you need the full face, the full records as well. We're to the point where we're so into photos, we have a mirror warmer in every single surgery. So there's no more running hot water into
Yeah.
no excuse of turning hot water on, takes ages, fogging up,
Yeah.
retractors, and there's unlimited retractors in every surgery room, and every nurse is trained well to retract gently,
No
nicely
excuses.
for patients. There's no excuses at all. Every patient needs photos.
Oh, I
So
like
on
that
that,
though.
yeah. Yeah. So on that, we say, we're telling every graduate, just treat this patient like he's your only patient. Spend the time, take photos, do everything, do that clean, give them a rest in between cleans, talk to them, get to know them more, really discussing the treatment plan afterwards as well, right? And I think, if you have that mindset, do that. You'll become a better dentist.
I actually really like your tip about taking photos and like the mirror warmer, because it reminds me one of my favorite books, like Atomic Habits. Like, I think one of the things they say, like, if you want to develop any skill, is like just make it easy for yourself.
That's right.
And
Remove
I'm
all the
just
barriers.
reflecting. Yeah, I'm just reflecting even on my own photography, that I used to take a lot more photos when I had a ring flash,
Yeah.
but then I switched to a twin flash.
Oh,
And I keep
no.
telling myself I need to go back to my ring flash,
Yeah.
because I have put in so many barriers for myself, because something's always out of battery. Like,
Yeah.
there's 2 flashes, there's the camera itself, there's like 4 different batteries, and
You gotta
something's
change
always
the
out of
angle for
battery.
twin flash as
You
well
got
if
to
you're taking a
change the
swizzle.
angle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like change the focus. And so because of that, because it's so difficult, I've just stopped taking photos, where previously when I had my ring flash, it was just pick it up, you take a photo. But things like you said as well, like I used to, every time I needed photos, my nurses would have to go out to Steri to go grab retractors, or go grab a mirror, or like grab the skinny mirror, not the big occlusal mirror. I want to take a quadrant photo. And I think one of those little simple things was like, okay, at the beginning of the day, can you hoard all of the mirrors and just keep them in the bottom drawer, so that
Yeah.
as soon as you want to take it, it's there. But I think it's just a really simple, implementable just thing that you could do, as you said, Bill, and just make it easy for yourself.
Yeah.
Teach a nurse so that you have no excuse not to do it. Right?
That's right. Yeah. And we tell all our team, like we train the nurses, we train the dentists and the nurses on how to set up for photos, to take photos. And my philosophy to them is, when the dentists, after they take the photos, from when they put the camera down to when the photos will be up on the screen for patients to see, that has to be within 10-15 seconds. Otherwise, the dentist will not want to take photos, because if the
Yeah.
dentist takes photos, they don't know how to put the SD card in, they don't know how to upload photos. There's that awkward silence. You're sitting on the seat and the patient's like waiting, you're sort of waiting, and the nurses are like, what do I click to open this photo? It's done. So, we're very big on, making that streamlined system. And then, so it's, like you said, less barrier, the easiest as possible. And we on dentists appreciate it. They're happier. Patients can see photos. They're more accepted to treatments, and they can see everything. It's much better.
Yeah.
It's a game changer.
Trust is built a lot
Yeah,
faster.
that's right. Yeah.
Did you have like another tip or another point to add, Carl?
I think get a camera. I think just generally,
Yeah.
I can see it's such a clear pattern. Dentists who get a camera or have their own camera. I mean, we have clinic cameras as well, but it doesn't. I feel like having your own camera you
You
just
get
want to take more
familiar with
photos
it.
with your own collection.
You
as
need to have your
well.
own, yeah.
Those dentists
Mm,
that do that early on are our best performing dentists. Like it's a very
mm.
clear pattern, because I feel like someone that wants to take photos and is then number one, they want to take ownership of the work. Number two, they see their work and they can confront it with the reality of their work. And then once they
Mm.
confront it, then they want to get better.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
that makes them, grow so much faster.
Like, how do we discuss cases without photos?
Yeah.
I tell our graduates, they sometimes come to me, they say, after my surgical, I tried to do a suture there, I kept tearing, I couldn't close properly. I was like, show me a photo, right? The ones that has a good photo, we can discuss everything where you made it, like, it's very good to discuss cases. And, the ones will come to you and ask you, can we discuss and can we talk about it? That's when you're going to learn the most, right? So not just discussing the cases before, but after as well. But the ones where it's like, oh, I can draw for you, I can see. Yeah, it just doesn't work as well. So
This was where the suture went, and this is
Yeah,
where
yeah,
it
that's
came
right.
out.
That's right. And there's no, we have dentists that's like, we're chasing them up and say, have you got your camera yet? Oh, the flash hasn't come yet. Oh, I'm still waiting for, there's always excuses, and 6 months pass, a year pass, and they still don't have their cameras. And, the ones where they just do it, they bring their cameras, they do it. I know it's a small thing, but really it's a big thing for us.
It's a big thing.
pattern.
It sounds like a small thing, but
You want to be a
huge
good
thing for us.
dentist, get a camera.
Yeah, but maybe it comes back to what you were saying as well, Carl, about like reflection and self-awareness and ownership of it. Much like what you were saying about every patient consult that you do, is very easy to just move on to the next one, in the same way that you do a filling and then you're like, wasn't the greatest filling, but we move on onto the next one. Or, oh, that suture wasn't very good. Oh, but like if you don't take a photo, then it's like, it's in some ways kind of not taking ownership of it, because it's like you move on, yeah, and you forget about it. But if you take a photo, it's immortalized. It's that point in time is captured. It is
Dr.
always
Berwyn
there.
has to see this.
Yeah, Dr. Berwyn has to be. Yeah. Dentistry, particularly as a new grad, is stressful enough as it is. And so if there's anything we can do to minimize all the external factors we need to think about, I'm all for it. Nothing is more daunting than the prospect of a patient complaint, especially in our early years. Thanks to Dental Protection Limited, I know I can sleep a little easier. Now, I've been working alongside DPL for years now, since my student days, and they have always been such huge supporters of everything I do, including the launch of the Graduate Dentist podcast. And so I know when push comes to shove and the time calls for it, I can trust DPL to have my back and to be in my corner. With a team of experienced dental legal consultants and an abundance of resources, including webinars, their own podcasts, magazines, which, by the way, I've written some articles for, you know DPL's got you covered. If you signed up as a student, you are automatically covered for your first 18 months of practice for free. Thank you, DPL, for always looking after me and for supporting the Graduate Dentist podcast.
There's a concept Kyle and I always talk about with new grads. We call it
Yeah.
burning the books. So we're quite lucky that in our rural clinics, we own the 2 biggest clinics in town. So, it's a bit of a monopoly. So you're always going to have patients flowing in. And, we can pretty much promise our new grads, you're going to get full books from day one in our rural practice. But we've seen a pattern over the years of, some dentists come in, all they care about is like doing the cleans faster, not following up with their patients, treatment plans, throw them a treatment plan, whether they come back or not, don't really know, don't really care. Maybe you've done a difficult extraction, you booked for a review, the patient didn't turn up, and then that patient is lost and is gone, we see that a lot, and we see that they start with full books, and then by the 6 months mark, it starts to get gappy. Yeah. And by a year, it gets really gappy. And then the second year, what's really happening? And there's a big difference versus someone that, talks to us about cases, self-reflect, takes ownership, tracks their patients, do those follow-ups that maybe you tell reception they don't do, or they can't communicate to the patient in a certain way that you wanted to, then you call the patient yourself. It's a huge, huge difference. And we always now tell our graduates, don't burn your boots. You might start out with full boots, but
Don't take that for granted.
yeah. Like you said with your analogy, like the water drains out, eventually. Yeah.
And then you have to reflect on why. Why is it draining if you're got all the patients? Why are your book's still not full? Carl, you said that everything changed when you went regional, and you're like, oh my god, like I love this. This is why I'm doing dentistry. Why was it? Was it that the practice, the environment, the demographic, or was it just that at that point in time you'd done all the CPD, you'd learnt, all the communication skills, and like it just all accumulated when you went and did that rural stint? Well, it's not really a
I
stint
think
because you're still there,
Yeah.
but yeah.
yeah, it was still there. I think
Mm.
it was the intersection of everything. I really put in the hard work to do a lot of courses, and then also going rural, I think I was first of all, I was like completely booked out from the get go for like 2 months with that job. So I was seeing a lot of patients, and patients were also extremely like nice and welcoming. In one of my in city jobs, patients will always be rushing me, and also there are places to get to as well. But in rural, the patients want to get to know you. They bring you apples. They bring you like food when you just like a nice feeling for them. I've never had that before, so I really enjoyed that working environment. Um, and also, yeah, I had mentors as well, finally as well. So it was an intersection of those three things that I started to like dentistry again. I was doing really fulfilling work, and I felt like I was making a difference in people's lives as well. It was great. Yeah, still loving it to this day.
And so was it there that you then came back to Sydney, and that's when you and Berwood were working together at that Eastwood practice?
Yeah, so I actually, while I was so when I was doing my rural stint, in the 3 years, I was actually doing fly in, fly out. So I would fly in Monday morning, catch a 8 a.m. flight, start at 11, and then I'll do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I'll fly home Thursday, and I'll do Friday with Berwyn, and then I'll do that every
Mm,
single week.
my goodness, they're really running on fumes.
And after a hard week, I'll see him out somewhere in the cities. And we can get to
Oh,
walk
it's
through
still
there.
not done. He's like, I got to make the most of it.
Yeah. I remember there was a period where,
Ugh.
Kyle and I shared mutual friends as well. And, being in your 20s,
Yeah,
you go out. We will always see each other at a certain bar all the time.
yeah,
And, and I remember the times where Carl was struggling a lot in the city. And then when he did this flying fly out, he's like, look, I have to wake up 4 a.m. some days, catch that flight. But it's worth it. I'll come back and I'll work hard so that I can come back and be here
yeah.
to enjoy my weekend. And I really respected that. That's you got to respect the hustle, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it might sound like I was on fuse, and I think by the end of third year, I probably was running a bit on fuse, but I think it was just so enjoyable, and I got so much out of it that I didn't really feel like I was running on fumes until maybe in third year, doing that every single week. But I really do enjoy just working by. I feel like when you're out in the regions, down in the rural area, your blood pressure just suddenly drops, right? And it's just so chill. Like you work very hard. There's so many patients that you have to see, but it's super rewarding.
And I think that's kind of the thing about it that you mentioned, Carl, was whether it feels rewarding or fulfilling or not versus whether it feels like you're running on fumes is kind of what you're getting out of it. And by the sounds of it, it was because it was worth it, right?
Yeah, it was
And
definitely
I
worth
feel
it.
like
Yeah,
if you didn't feel like you were getting something out of it, then it would start feeling draining, and then it would start feeling like it was sucking the life out of you. And the reason I share that is because I get asked a lot by new grads of how do you do everything? How do you still work clinically and run a podcast and like do all this content creation and like coaching and yada 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 and still maintain a social life and whatnot? And I said this year I actually feel like is the most balanced I've ever been,
mm.
even though arguably I'm doing so much more this year than I have previously. And I think it comes down to being really clear and intentional about, well, what is it that I am doing? Like, why am I working at this practice? Or why am I doing this? Or why am I committing myself to these things? And if all of those things are aligned with what my goals are or what I hope to be achieving, then it's like, oh, it's not draining, it's fulfilling because, as you said, I'm getting something out of it and it's fun and it's rewarding. Whereas I felt like last year there were certain things that I was saying yes to or doing that weren't aligned, that then felt like because I didn't really want to be doing those things or it wasn't adding value, I wasn't growing for it or growing from it, that's when it starts to feel draining. And so I wonder whether when you said you got to your third year, when it started to feel like you were running on fumes, maybe it was because it kind of like served your purpose in doing that like on a weekly basis, and you'd grown as a clinician, and it was kind of the next chapter was waiting for you.
Yeah, like I think one of the main reasons was also like I met the love of my life, the love of my life, Helen, and I really wanted to like come home as well and settle down back in Sydney. And we were doing lots of distance for a while, so I think that made it a bit harder as well. But yeah, like it's so funny you mentioned that. Like some two people asked me this week, "Hey, Carl, are you ever tired of this?" And then I was like, "Oh wow!" I'm like thinking about, it, I was like, I am tired, but it's really fun, and I feel like sounds a bit cheesy, but I think being tired is actually a privilege as long as, you're having yeah, it's a bit of a it's like at the end of the day, you should be tired, you're doing a lot, right? But it's also like, you are doing something. You're not bored, you're like growing as a person, you're doing so many things. I think it's absolute privilege to be tired.
Well, I think there's like a really, really good quote or video that's like circulating where it's like what a privilege it is to be tired doing something that you dreamed of or doing the things that you love or that you find fulfilling. But by the sounds of it, like when you guys met at Eastwood, it was tiring for a lot of reasons. Working at a challenging practice. But you shared earlier before Berwyn about both of you guys realizing, hey, like we've been in the trenches together. We've clearly got a good bromance going on. We have skills that aligned where Carl's got this focus on ortho, you've got this special interest in oral surgery. And when you guys went to that practice ownership course with Nove, there was this discussion of partnership and the pros of it. And you said before, Berwyn, that you're like, oh, there's a lot of pros that you guys can see really selling the idea to you. Can you dive into, I guess, like what those were? But then also, were there any cons? Were there any red flags that had you guys looking at each other being like, is this something I really want to go down and commit myself to? Yeah.
Funny you say that because I think, especially in the past 2 years, as Kai and I have met more and more owners and go to other events, we're sort of shocked at how many partnerships fall apart. And not just falling apart, but getting really vicious and really ugly as well. I think I can't 100% speak for Carl, but when I went into it, it was a little bit of a dive into it and see how it goes. I didn't think about it too much. I didn't go into a full character reference search on Carl or anything like that. I trusted my instincts. We on the paper, there's things that fit in and worked well, and then we just went into it. But to answer your question, I guess I didn't think about what may not work as much. I just thought about, there's two people, being in it with two people, you can always have a certain opinion and, it can be scary making a lot of decisions. We learned a lot as we went, especially on the non-clinical things, right? That's what practice ownership, a lot of the hard parts are, on HR, on hiring the right dentists, mentorship, all these other things. So I think having two people, in my opinion, is definitely an advantage. And sometimes if you have that little doubt on, am I making that right decision? And you have your partner backing you up or agreeing with you or giving you another aspect or other opinion, that's very, very helpful. And you can't get that just by yourself. So other than that, lifestyle flexibility or that part, I think that's for me one of the biggest advantages there. Just knowing that there's someone there with you going into it together. Of course, with our multiple locations, I think if it was just one of us, that would have been quite impossible. Carl has, a boy and another kid coming now as well. Can you imagine going to rural every week?
Yeah.
Having kids, it's going to be very, very hard for his family and for himself as well. So I think us sharing the load does really help. We didn't, when we first started, we didn't think about, oh, we are going to have all these locations of rural practices, and things just happened. The right opportunity came up, and like Carl shed light on earlier, we really enjoyed rural and we saw value in rural, and we wanted to have that sort of that environment and base set up so that we can train dentists and give them the experience that we sort of had as well. So because of that, then we sort of scattered around. But now, I think, thinking about it now, I think, I don't think we can do it. We can't do it without being in this partnership,
Yeah.
being without each other.
Yeah.
A bit of tips, I guess, going in, me and Carl did talk about our goals, make sure our goals aligned. We wanted to see, made sure that Carl wasn't wanting to have one practice and build that practice up, and here's me thinking I want 10 practices, right? But those small things do need to align. I think having different areas of dentistry does help. So one person doing ortho, and I don't touch ortho much at all. And then me doing surgery mainly, and then Carl doesn't touch that much surgery as well. So I think that complements each other. That's good. People talk about personality types and analysis and all that. I think there is something to it. Now realizing we're actually a very good, we're actually a good fit when it comes to MBTI and all these things. But I think when you have two people who's clashing or of certain attribute that doesn't work with each other, that could be very, very difficult as well. Having said that, still do your due diligence, that we sign contracts, we engaged lawyers to discuss what happens if things don't work out. What happens if one of us, can't work or something happens to us?
You have to talk about it.
We have to talk
Expectations.
about. We really do have to talk about the bad times of what happens if. That's the reality of things. So don't hide that either. Put everything on the table and make sure that you talk to that with your business partner as well. So that's us for partnerships.
I always think so Berwyn, what's your Myers-Briggs?
I was gonna ask you actually.
Yeah.
So he's like a
ENT.
thinker and I'm like a ENFP, which is the feeler. I think in a partnership, I think two of Berwyn will actually work pretty well together. I think two of me would absolutely not work.
Yeah.
I think it would too many emotions. Like I think everyone there will just be emergency mode all the time. Cause I feel like every time something happens, I'm always like, shit, this is not good. But then when I talk to Berwyn, he's like, oh, like it's okay. Like, and I was like, you know what? It is okay. Yeah, it is. It's actually what I'm mad. Yeah, it is what it is. And I was like, true, right? So yeah, I do think personalities do matter. Yeah.
Like it made me think of, because I remember watching one of your videos, Carl, and you shared that you were an ENFP, and I'm like, I'm an ENFP as well. And you had said that you feel like it works well that your business partner Berwyn was. I didn't know you were an ENTJ. Is it Berwyn?
Yeah, that's
but
right.
just
Yeah,
having something that was complementary and from a slightly different like strengths in different areas ends up working well with your partnership. And what's really funny is that my brother and I often like collaborate on certain things, and or even just like talking through ideas and stuff, and we realize that our personality types are pretty much the same as what you guys had shared. Like I'm an ENFP, he is an ENFJ, and we put it through chat, because chat's the knows all and know it all and reliable, right? But it was just like, oh, how do these align? And I think because we share so many similar philosophies, but also it helps that same family and upbringing and values, and the core philosophy is the same, but the way that we perceive the world and the way that our approach to things is different, where I'm more feelings based but he's more logic and rationale. And it works well when I'll see things through a particular light of like, oh, but how does this impact people? Or that intuition of how people are going to react and respond, and there's that creative element of it, whereas he's more just like, yes, but like solutions, Erica. What are your systems? How are you going to problem solve this? And I'm like, you're boring, right? Like you should do this. But it complements each other well. You need both, Yeah.
And you brought up about upbringing. I think that's important as well. That's actually, me and Carl always says that as well. And we see that in the graduates that we hire as well, that, me and Carl is very, very similar. Immigrant family, came to Australia at a younger age, did sort of a bit of primary school, high school, and then study really hard to get into, one of the Asian trade, that'd be dentistry, medicine, law, whatever, engineering. And then got in, got away from home, and now want to sort of come back home. So, selective school as well. So not saying that we can't get along with other people, but that is a bit comforting to know that we're very, very similar. And sometimes, when we talk about mentorship, it's the same as well. Like we sort of look for similar people sometimes as well, of similar upbringing, and
someone that has a bit of drive.
Drive, ethics, and can work hard. I'm not saying that other people can't, but we sort of know where we're being through, and that sort of works out. So I definitely agree on the point about personality, upbringing is important. Upbringing as well. Yeah, that's very, very important.
In a profession like dentistry, people don't always realize just how physically taxing it can be. One of the best pieces of advice I got early on in my career was simple: protect yourself, especially whilst we're young, fit, and healthy, because you never know what might happen. It's easy to think we're young and invincible, but I've heard way too many stories from sporting mishaps, back spasms, hand and shoulder injuries. I mean, I've even heard of someone sneezing and putting their back out. And just like that, you could be out of work for months. That's why things like income protection, trauma cover, or total and permanent disability insurance are so important. It's about having that extra layer of security and peace of mind, knowing that you have a backup plan in case something were to ever stop you from working. And I couldn't have asked for anyone better than Chris Chand at Sharon Partners to look after me. Chris has been my personal insurance broker and financial advisor since I was a new grad, and I'm genuinely so grateful for all the time he spends getting to know me and my goals. Chris and his team specialize in financial planning specifically for healthcare professionals, so they understand the unique challenges of our industry. That way, we can focus on what we do best, looking after our patients whilst they help secure our financial future and protect arguably our greatest asset, ourselves. A big thank you to Sharon Partners for always looking after me and for supporting the Graduate Dentist podcast. So did you guys both know, you're saying like setting expectations early about the vision and whether one person just wanted one practice and the other one was envisioning this entire empire, right? Like the vision for you guys early on, and how did it go from being like one practice to then, the next one and the next one? And had you guys always known you wanted to be rural, and was that your first practice, or was it more so like Sydney? I guess what was the evolution of like the building the practices?
I think our first practice, we definitely wanted to be in Sydney. We looked at a lot of outskirts of Sydney at the start. Not really in like like city areas, but, fringes of Sydney. So that was the first thing that we looked at. Reason being, obviously, we know Sydney well. We wanted to be in Sydney. So that's one of the things we looked at. After our Sydney practice, we're actually we're in a sort of lower socioeconomic area at the moment. Um, um, After that practice, some opportunities did come up in rural. I think that comes back to Carl's experience in rural. I've never been to rural, but I can see that he gained a lot from there. And the constant patience and being
I miss the
rewarded
heaps.
the
I miss
treatment. So when that opportunity came up, we said why not? That does expand our area a little bit more. We still wanted to be within sort of New South Wales, within drivable distance. So that worked out. And then once we had those two locations, we sort of built on around those locations more. But yeah, we never had a conversation about, oh, we want a rural practice from day one. I guess the right opportunity came up, and because of Carl's rural experience, and we can see
It
the
made sense.
advantages of having that rural practice. And now, with our graduate program, they all go to these rural locations, and, they can get the same sort of experience and the journey that Carl went on. So we wanted to provide that as well, because we know it can be a bit hard in metro when you first graduate. So yeah, I guess that all worked out there.
I guess one thing that you guys can kind of like shared throughout the episode as well is, I guess, this graduate program that you have created now for all your associates that you hire is very much built and shaped by your own previous experiences, right? And you
For
guys have
sure. Yeah.
mentioned things that you feel result in someone's success. And I think we've shared a few things about like, working on communication early, or maybe doing a stint in rural where you get the reps, you have the patient flow, you've got patients that are a little bit more like patient kinda the
Kinda.
expectations.
Yeah.
But that kind of experience that you had, Carl, that you're like, I got so much out of it, I'd like our associates to be able to experience that as well, compared to metro where it might be really challenging to start off with initially. You guys touched on about like the mentality that they should have and how it may be shaped by upbringing, but then also like taking ownership and doing the photos and reflecting and coming to you guys with cases. I guess that's a product. Like, it's very easy to speak upon it now, in hindsight, having gone through that and hired so many grads. But I wanted to know, like, in your early days when you guys were learning things and the challenges of practice ownership and the non-clinical side of things with hiring, were there any, I guess, like challenges or mistakes that you guys made early on when it came to hiring grads or dentists, or mentoring them, or things that have shaped your now attitude to working with young dentists and new grads? I don't know if that's a
I
bit of a
think,
loaded question.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think one thing that has sort of changed when it comes to us hiring with new grads is we used to just tell them this is the mentorship that we sort of provide. Give them a rundown of what they can expect, and then we look for a graduate that sort of we think is going to do well. Um, but nowadays, we're more and more sort of asking the graduate about what sort of mentorship style they want. And because we're starting to see that mentorship definitely goes both ways. It's not just 100% what you can provide, but is that what you're providing the right fit for the graduate? Because some graduates can expect, a lot of hand holding. They want maybe a lot of face-to-face contact. They the style that they're after might be a bit different to the style that we provide. And we find that even though they might thrive as a dentist somewhere else, but they may not do as well
Yeah.
with us. So more and more these days, we look at graduates and see,
It's a good
is it a
fit.
good culture fit and good mentorship fit for us, so we can give them the knowledge and the skills for them to develop as the clinician that we want them to be or they aspire to be. That's, I think, one thing. And mistakes in hiring.
I mean, we're still making heaps of mistakes, so we're still learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, with hiring grads, I think our expertise graduate programs evolved a lot over the years. In the beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing about 6 years ago, but now I think we realize that the grads that we look for are the ones that have a bit of drive, and we want dentists that want to get better. And I think our program, in a way, we are continuously wanting to drive the dentists to be better. And I think the dentists that want to just take a bit more chill, a bit more independent, and just want to take it a little bit easier is probably not the best fit for us now that we realize that. Because I think it can feel, to be honest, like, we don't want to always be coming to you like, hey, how's everything going? How's everything going? Any cases, right? Do you need any help? We want the grads that we now attracting and are doing well with us are the ones that come to us. Hey, look at my class too. It's not very good. Can you help me out? Those are the kind of grads that we're now better at looking. We know we're hiring for, and I think they're the ones that do quite well with us. So I think at the end of the day, it's a bit of about the cultural fit, and we are a bit better at looking for that now as well.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important also to realize that, like, oh, what's right for one person isn't right for another person. And early on, I think as students, when you graduate, it's easy to see, like, oh, that person's at that job, or this person's at that job, and they're getting this, and that's the kind of mentorship that they get. And you're always comparing it, right? But then, yeah, realizing it's just like what works for someone may not necessarily work for you. And that comes back to like what you want out of it. So I think it's like you guys being very clear of like, well, this is our practice culture. Yes, we can make accommodations to help your grad in order for them to thrive, but then also recognizing, but is this the culture that suits them and what they want out of it as well? Carl, we I think interacted a little bit last year when I was presenting at the practice owners conference, and I remember we had this conversation where I shared about like the topic was the workplace, the motive. What was it? The motivation and workplace desires of a new grad in 2025, and we shared a lot about just like the Gen Z mentality. And I remember like you taking photos of it and sending it into the group chat with like your dentist, and you came up to me afterwards and you're just like, oh, I messaged them of like, do you guys feel overwhelmed and overstimulated? And all of them were like, yes. Yeah. And you're like, wow, I need to go back and have dinner with them and have a conversation and realize that, yeah, the way that you see things is different. And like you said, times were different when you guys were new grads, and mentorship was different when you guys were new grads, and there are generational differences. But I guess, did you have any thoughts or anything that you wanted to share from that in terms of your observation and how you show up for like your new grads and what you've had to learn?
I mean, the biggest difference nowadays I find with the newer grads is they want to do everything, and they want to do complex work very early on. Like and I want to say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I think because, man, it sounds so old for saying this, but they grew up with social media, and I think comparison is something that is quite on top of mind for them. I think a lot of grads want to do um, full mouth rehabs, veneers, ortho implants 1 or 2 years out. And I think that's the thing that has changed from my view. And we're there to, for us, we're happy to accommodate that. For example, we just had one of our second year grads just do a band up, put on braces, right? She's like 4 to 15, 16 months out, right? That's for me, that's crazy, right? If you asked me that 10 years ago, I was like, whoa, that's insane, right? But we're there to accommodate that. We want people that have a bit of drive, want to grow and learn a lot, but we're also there to try and make sure nobody's being a cowboy, everything's done right, that you've done the CBD for you to deserve to be able to do and start this treatment under heavy supervision. So I think that's something that's changed. I think we have to keep on top of mind of that, it's not a bad thing. And I think a lot of people, hate on Gen Zs, and saying like, there's so much like, I think that Gen Z dashing, and I feel like it's not right.
I think there's a balance of it because, like, as we often talk about, is that I think Gen Zs nowadays, or like the new grads nowadays, have so much potential to do so much because, yes, there's social media. Yes, there's the dark side of it where there's constant comparison. And in some ways, I think these unrealistic expectations, but also the access to knowledge, the access to
Yeah.
CPD, the access to be able to upskill so rapidly means there's
Yes.
so much
So quick.
potential. But I
Yeah.
think from your perspectives as practice owners, and I had a conversation with my practice owner recently about it as well, is, as we said, as young grads, sometimes we don't have that relativity and that hindsight. And there's years where my practice owner was saying, like, yeah, as a owner, you have to be cognizant of what treatment are your patients going through. Because I guess as an associate, you can burn through them because, well, I might only work here for a year and I might work here for 2 years or 3 years and then I'll move on and I'm gone. And that patient is no longer my problem. And not to say that people go in with that mentality, but there isn't, it's like it's not yours, right? Like you're not locked in there forever. Whereas from a practice owner, it's yours, it's your child, right? It's like it's your baby. These patients are here with you forever. So if something goes wrong, like you're still going to be here. And my owner was like my boss was sharing about how there are cases that previous associates took on that were fine at that point in time, but now 5 years later they've come back because something's broken or something's failed, but that associate's long gone. And he's just like, well, it's my problem. Like I'm
Yeah.
the one that's got
On
to,
us, yeah.
yeah, it's on you.
Just keeping them like, yeah, as you said, like just keeping the keep giving me a reality check, and also telling them to be a bit more patient as well. And to try and, tell them stop comparing against other peers.
Yeah.
Everyone runs their own race. And I feel like if you keep comparing and keep seeing what other people are doing, you're gonna burn yourself out very quickly as well.
Berwyn, do you feel like there are any conversations that you find yourself having, like time and time and time and time again, that you're often reminding your associates, or things that advice that you would say to them about, like, this is what you need to focus on, or this is what you should be doing?
I think, sounds like a broken record, but yeah, communication is one big thing that we always do remind our graduates on. It's not purely just about going to a course, learning the tools and tricks and just applying it, because I sometimes tell them you can't just treat every patient as the same and use that same technique for these patients. A typical example in rural, you get some, middle-aged men who comes in and, they just want a straight answer. They want to do minimal treatments. Maybe if they have the toothache, just pull the tooth out. They don't really care about other things. And if you then, spend a lot of time trying to explain things, that might put off that type of patient, versus, maybe the middle-aged female that comes in, that wants to have a chat with you, wants to tell you her whole life story, and, wants you to be her dentist and get to know you on a more personal level. Then your communication style should change a little bit. So I think one thing I reminded a new graduate recently was that, yes, you have some good skills for a certain type of patient, but you do need to alter that and change that a little bit depending on the patient that you're seeing. Because if you don't, then you just repeatedly do the same thing. That's not going to work. You're still treating a patient, a person, and every person is different. Yeah, that's one thing that I spoke to someone about. And
No, I think one thing I always tell all grads is like, I mean, with the communication part is always there's actually two parts to it. There's you explaining clearly and in an easy to understand way the problem and the solutions, but you also have to build rapport as well. I think a lot of grads forget about that part. Just even smiling and bring the right energy to who you're treating as well, and just you know, getting the patient out of the chair to sit at the computer to actually talk about it instead of talking them in the chair. You know, we all know that. I don't know if you last time you sat in a dental chair, but as soon as you sit there, you feel anxious. So just, just building rapport is also so important as well. And I think a lot of grads forget about that as well.
It's hard because no one's ever taught us that. In dental school, communication isn't a topic. It's not one of the things that you get examined on. We think in like stats and facts and diagnoses. And what was really interesting was when I had a dental student come observe me, and I remember him just being like, "Oh, so like, what material is that? Like, what bonding system did you use? And why did you classify it as stage 3 perio? Was it because like is the patient smoking more than 15 cigarettes a day?" And you realize that when you go through dental school and the way that you are assessed is based off an exam, and you start thinking of everything like an exam question because that's what like you're trained to do. And so then
It's
when you enter the
focusing on the
real
wrong
world,
things.
when you enter the real world, you get a patient and you treat them like an exam question of like, what is the diagnosis? What is the treatment plan? The stats and the facts and stuff, and then you kind of forget the human side of it. And that so much of dentistry is the more, and I know I'm very early on in my career, but like the more I do dentistry, you realize that so much of it is really just like the person behind it, the expectations. If anything, that's the bigger challenge as opposed to the clinical side of it.
Yeah. And I think another part to that would be like, once you build a rapport patient, I think it's, you have to see the patient a few times before you actually start building a patient base. And I think that's where the patient fit comes from. For me, there are some jobs which I look back on and I was like, hey, that was actually not a bad job. And I think if I stuck around in those jobs for 3 to 4 years, I will be very busy, right? And I always tell grads, look, if you want to work in Sydney, Brisbane, whatever, fine, but just know that it's going to take a bit of time. But if you want to build full books, it's going to take you a few years. And I always have this rough metric, and I feel like it does. It probably plays out pretty well. Is if you stay in one job for 3 to 4 years and you work at least 3 to 4 days in that one job and you give it your all, you'll be very full by E4.
Mhm. Yeah, one analogy we give some of our new grads as well that we say, in your first year or two, you're planting the seed. And that comes to, even if you think, yes, there's maybe a reduced vertebral dimension, patient is not going to fork out 50K to do this mouth rehab, but spend the time to take photos, talk to the patient about it, mention it, tell them what can be done and potentially can be the benefits of fixing this long term. Yes, they're not going to fork out 50K at this stage, but year 2, you repeat it again. Year 3, and then maybe year 4, you're harvesting the the gains because all this repetition, the patient's knowing. Maybe you mention, look, if you keep going like this, you'll break another tooth. The patient breaks another tooth, then they're like, man, I really need to do something about it. So it's about that patience, about planting the seed, and every patient is treatment. Don't just doubt that they're not going to do it. Present what you know is right, what's good for the patient, what's best for the patient. Don't ever doubt that the patient's not going to be able to afford it, they're not going to do it. Explain like
If you see the
this is the
value,
right,
and then
right, do it
it's
for
the
the
right
patient.
thing for the patient.
Yeah, and we do constantly remind our new grads about that too. Yeah.
Yeah, like no, I don't. One sentiment that I often think of is just like no now doesn't mean no forever. But again, back to relativity, when it's your only first time you're seeing this patient and you're hoping, you've got these expectations that I'm going to be the best dentist this patient has ever seen, and they say no, you're like, is it because I'm a terrible dentist? But you're like, well, no, they're just not ready for it. Yeah, it's the first time they're hearing it. They don't know you, they don't trust you. It's their first time meeting you, and that trust takes time to build. And I think Johan shares this thought and philosophy as well. It's just like, you build that rapport, you constantly like you help work on educating your patient and empowering them. And at some point in time, when you've got that relationship, you've got that connection, you've got that trust, and they're ready, you yourself are also ready to do it, because in your first year you may not be ready to do a full mouth rehab, or you may not necessarily be ready to place that implant. But when you start planting those seeds and you're working on building that garden, then like years later it all starts flourishing and you're like, oh, where did this all come from? But it didn't happen overnight. It happened from those years of planting those seeds whilst you as yourself was evolving and developing as a clinician.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes time.
Yeah, Tao and I constantly have patients, from 2, 3 years ago, a treatment plan coming back, wanting to
So
have
surprised, yeah. So you
wanting-
came back.
wanting to have another chat and see if they
Yeah.
can do something about it. It's
It happens.
it happens for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything, I guess, from either of your journeys or like part of your career trajectory from early years or going to practice ownership or being practice owners and mentoring young associates, like anything that I haven't asked you guys yet that you feel like would be worthwhile sharing with our grads?
Being patient, work hard,
Take ownership.
take ownership. I think taking ownership is a big one.
Buy a camera. Take photos.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground. Hey.
Yeah.
I think one thing I think is important is finding an owner that wants you to succeed. And I think that's really important because I think there are well, from what I experienced, there are some owners that like to gatekeep a little bit. And just like for example, there's practices where there's a principal dentist and they're the only ones and they just want to do all the complex work. And they don't really want to teach the grad any complex work because then they will take their share of it. So I think it's important to find a workplace where the owner wants you to grow as well. Okay, that's really important. And also, deciding what kind of mentorship should you want as well, because some dentists they want to be more independent. They don't want to be uh, coached on, or they don't want feedback as well, and that's completely fine. But if you're someone that wants mentorship and wants to get better at a good pace as well, you want to find a owner that is willing to sit with you. Maybe block out a certain time of the week, or not just like, hey, call me when you need me. Right? I think that's really important for growth, is having a owner that wants you to grow as well.
I think that's so important. I think like even just personally reflecting on it, I think such a big factor of success is, yes, there needs to be that internal drive and motivation and initiative, but it's the people that are around you. And I often think about like I wouldn't be the person that I am if it wasn't for the people that are around me, but like are actually in your corner and genuinely want to see you win, who are there to celebrate your wins, who even when you're going through hardship or struggling or doubting yourself, where they're like, no, you can do it. Like, I believe in you. And it seems corny and cheesy, but it goes such a long way when you've got people who are in your corner who want you to win, right, Carl?
For sure, especially in your first few years, you feel so secure, right? You don't know anything,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
I think having someone just backing you and just having that confidence, like for example, like Berwyn, when he does a lot of wisdom teeth in new grads, when I want to learn wisdom teeth, Berwyn's gonna be in the room with them, assisting, right? And I feel like you want someone that is happy to block off some time in their own books to come help you. I think that's huge.
Mm-hmm. Well, my last question, that I know we've covered so much ground throughout this episode, and just to continue getting you guys to think and really provide as much value for our listeners as possible. But my last question on the episode is always that, obviously we have all these conversations with people day in, day out, and every so often someone says something that sticks with you, and you go back and you think on it and it leaves an impact, and you bring it up later on in another conversation. And so I wanted to know, like, throughout your careers or even recently or anything, like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a conversation that you've had that really stuck with you, a story that's left a mark that you think would be beneficial to share with our graduate audience? And I'll give you guys some time to think about it, and
I
then
think for me,
maybe
it's very
Yeah.
simple. I think something that I've been really trying to practice in the last few years is just taking ownership. It's your life. Whatever happens, it's your fault. Okay, in the sense that everything where you are is all the decisions that you've made up to this point. Of course, there's luck involved as well. I definitely recognize that. But if you want to make a change or you want to like get better, then you take ownership and you make some decisions to try and change that, right? You can't keep relying on like, oh, I think, you can't be like, oh, it's the practice's fault. Then leave the practice, right? If you're like, oh my god, like someone else is learning more than me, then you go learn more, right? You go find the practice that will support you. You do the CBD, and you do put in the hard yards. Because whoever's doing more, they put in the hard yards and they deserve to do more, right?
It's easy to blame or find an excuse,
Yeah.
but if you keep doing that, you're not going to develop and you're not going to get better. It's easy to say, because I don't have the patience, because I don't have time to do this CPD or, whatever.
Yeah.
But, just action, just make a plan and just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel
That
like,
feeds into mentality. Yeah, like I
Yeah,
think
for
Mass
sure.
was sharing it in our last episode where we were saying he's very philosophical, and both of you say you know Mass quite well. But one of the things that he shared that has really left a mark on me was that excellence is a habit, or we are what we repeatedly do. And so if you get into that mindset of blaming everything else around you, of not taking ownership, that becomes who you are. You become the person that doesn't take ownership, that is like, oh, woe is me, the world is so unfair and has wronged me. But when you change that mentality and you start taking ownership and you're actually empowering yourself, and it then becomes like, no, I'm in control of my life, I can change things, and you just keep doing that and it becomes who you are.
100%. I just, all this is under the sun. For example, you don't have enough time. I feel like that's an absolute excuse, right? Like, I feel like I'm doing more now than I ever did, in a day than I did when I was in my 20s, and I have much, much less time these days with like a young family. I'm waking up earlier. I'm doing more exercising. You will find a time if you're motivated enough to improve on certain skill. Um, so there's not. I think it's all on you at the end of the day.
Berwyn, did you have any thoughts or anything to share?
One maybe simple message, don't become complacent, always strive to do more. So I think, maybe not as much for the new grad, but as you become more recent grad, some people sort of set into comforts. They somewhere there, maybe they're not 100% happy with, but they said it's, pays the bills, you go to work, it's familiar, it's easy, and it sort of become stale and they don't sort of develop as a clinician. I think in dentistry, what prevents you from burning out, keeps it interesting, is always learning new skills, aspects. Yes, maybe your principal is doing all the implants. Why not learn about it? Talk to your principal and say, I'm interested to learn some more. Maybe that wisdom teeth you always refer out, take a wisdom teeth course, maybe a hands-on course, find a mentor, go observe some specialists, and then learn how to do those things. I think that will keep you drive and keeps dentistry interesting and prevents you from burning out, and you can become more a better dentist as well.
Yeah. And I think on that note of learning a clinical skill, I think when you want to learn, say for example, this is my experience. I think if you want to learn, like for example, ortho, as I've done, I think it's important to learn this discipline from different providers as well, because it gives you really good perspectives. For example, when I've learned from like Dr. Mahoney, Dr. Hall, Jeff Hall, everybody, Dr. Isabel. Everyone, I think you find some commonalities, and then that really reinforces you of what's right. And then you also see different philosophies as well, which I think is super important as well to give you a well-rounded education. So I think if you're learning implants, maybe it's really good to learn different providers as well over the years. And I think also, to put it in perspective, I think it takes a few years for you to learn something properly. So I also, one thing we always tell our grads is don't learn ortho implants endo, right? In your first few years, pick one, sit on it for a few years until you get better, then maybe start learning something else. Because I find that the ones that learn everything or different disciplines throughout the years never get better, never get good at one of them.
They get okay at everything, but not good at anything.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah,
Hey?
exactly. Yeah.
But I
It's
think
much better
that
to have a focus, do that. And to add on to Carl's, also, it's okay to do multiple courses. Yes, Dr. Mahoney's EODO course, very popular. Carl's done it, and he went ahead and did other courses as well so it's okay. Just
Yeah.
invest in your future, invest in your career.
Especially the early years. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's a really important message, because so often grads are always like, and it's hard because, yes, courses cost money and people
Yes,
worry
too.
about making the wrong decision, but
Yeah.
everyone's always very high strung on like, is this the right course to do? Is this the best course to do? But important to understand that no single course is going to teach you everything. And you might not be in the stage of your career where you're going to like learn everything from that one course. I think there's benefit even doing the same course multiple times. If you attended that same course at
100%.
different stages in your
100%.
career, you'd get something out of it. But like what you said earlier on, Berwyn, about if you try applying the same philosophy or same treatment modality or same approach to every single patient, you realize that, well, no, everyone's a little bit different. So having that well-rounded understanding from different providers means that you become a more well-rounded dentist that's able to cater for different people. But it seems like throughout an episode, there's this overarching theme of patience, not tempering your expectations, taking time, spending time building your books, investing in your patients, investing in yourself, and that things will happen, right? And things will come together. And we're at the very beginning of a long career ahead of us.
Yeah, everything will be okay. Just
Yes.
trust the process. Yeah, everything's gonna be fine.
And maybe to add one last thing, we always talked about burnout is a real thing.
Yeah.
Especially in our early years. I know we talked about all these, different things and doing more courses, but take a holiday as well. We always say,
Carl, you still
CPD
need to take yours.
Yeah. And don't be like Carl and make sure you don't do a 6-month holiday in your first year. But you need a holiday.
Yeah.
Plan that in. It's good to have something to look forward to. And trust me, you'll be a much happier person knowing that something's coming instead of just working endlessly. CPD is not always a holiday.
That's not a holiday.
It's not a holiday.
Sure, you might go overseas and tag on things. That's fine, but sitting in a classroom over the weekend, it still takes mental strength and you learning new things and you're absorbing. It's tiring, right? So plan some holidays. Spend time with your loved ones. It's important, and it will be good for your well-being as well. So burnout is a real thing. Please, give yourself a
Have
break.
non-dental friends and everyone.
Yeah.
That really helps.
Yeah.
Carl and Berwyn, thank you guys so much for joining me for today's episode. We've covered a lot of ground, had some really insightful conversations, so I really enjoyed it. And thank you guys for sharing everything.
No, that was really funny. I can't believe it's an hour and a half.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
Thank you, Erica, for having us. And if any listeners want to reach out to any of us, feel free to message us. You want to talk about new grads, the graduate program that we have, anything like that. We're more than happy to lend a helping hand. I think we do have a lot of things to share based on our experiences, and always there to make a new friend, someone to talk to. Yeah.
Someone out. If you
Help someone
got
out,
fired, talk to me. I'm being.
We've all been there. Yeah. And it's gonna be okay. It's all right.
And thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Graduate Dentist Podcast. I really hope you've taken something valuable away from this episode and that you feel heard, you feel seen, inspired, and optimistic about our journey as graduate dentists. As I always say, we're in it together, so let's spread the word, let's share the love, send this to your friends, your colleagues, and those who are on a similar path who you feel may benefit from being part of the community. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so send me a message, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time for another episode.